When you are. All right, hi, welcome. I am Cassie Street. I am the Chief Operating Officer with Reach Council over in Midlothian, Texas. I'm super excited to be here tonight to talk to you a little bit about hidden in plain sight, what to look for when we're talking about teen substance use. So before we get into it, let me tell you a little bit about what is happening in my agency and my world. And my slides are not advancing. So we'll just talk anyways. Reach Council is a nonprofit located over in Midlothian, Texas. We have been around for 35 years. We are in the field of school-based and community-based prevention programming and recovery support services. We do this specifically in Ellis County and Johnson County. We were founded here 35 years ago by the citizens of Midlothian. We've continued to work in these communities. So our mission is to encourage and support the safe and healthy choices vital to the well-being of our youth, families, and community. So like I said, we've been around for 35 years, lots of great programs happening. We get to work in lots of amazing schools here in Ellis County, talking about not just substances, but also building up coping skills, life skills, all the things that we need as adults, building those in our young people to help them be more resistant to the influences of substance use and other things. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about hidden in plain sight, but why do we talk about teen substance use? Substance use among teens continues to be a huge concern. Thankfully, the rates of use in the past year have remained fairly steady in the last few years. However, these numbers are still really high. We can kind of see up here, this first column is nicotine vaping. So past year use for 8th graders nationally, when they do this Monitoring the Future study, shows that 12% of 8th graders, 1 out of every 10, has used a nicotine vape in the last year. That number jumps up to 1 out of every 5 10th graders and 27% of 12th graders. While these numbers, again, have remained steady, they're still really high. Cannabis use, we're looking at over 8% of 8th graders, nearly 20% of 10th graders, and 30% of 12th graders have used cannabis in some form or fashion in the past year. They do have a THC vaping breakout, but these numbers are not matching up with what I think is real world numbers, because their breakouts in the Monitoring the Future study only report about 20% of 12th graders having used in the last year. THC vaping really has been on the rise for the last couple years because it's been so much easier to access. And then alcohol use. Alcohol is still king among our teenagers, mainly because of its accessibility. You've got 15% of your 8th graders and 30% of your 10th graders have used alcohol in some form or fashion, and over half of your 12th graders have used it in the past year. So the other things that they ask about are other illicit drugs. They're not breaking out in this particular study things like opioids, so those numbers are kind of low. All right, so why else do we talk about teen substance use? And why does this matter at this age? It has to do with their brain development. Our brains are underdeveloped until they're 25, so they're going through the most change, and most of that change is happening right now in their frontal lobe prefrontal cortex. This area is responsible for decision-making, planning, impulse control, personality, mood, all of those things. Basically, all those things our teenagers struggle with. So what does this have to do with substance use? Well, our developing brains are so easily changed. They're changed by the environment. Does this person live in a safe place, or is their world unsafe, chaotic? Whichever situation is in place leads to a brain either wired for safety or wired for survival. Do they have stressors? Acute stressful events, traumatic events, major disasters can cause the brain to wire itself differently. Think of things like post-traumatic stress syndrome. And chemicals. Introducing chemicals into the developing brain can change the way it wires itself. When under the influence of substances, the substances impair activity in different parts of the brain. Over the course of time, that impairment can become permanent. As that teen brain is developing, areas of the brain responsible for learning, memory, emotional regulation, decision-making, impulse control are more easily changed, leading to disruption in these areas, causing them to not be able to think through choices as easily or as well. And that leads to other problems in life if you can't think through things. Additionally, that teen brain is also wired for learning and addiction. So science has repeatedly demonstrated that age of onset of first use drastically impacts the likelihood that someone will develop a substance use issue. So if we look at this little pyramid right here, and pretend in this period we have 10 individuals, and all 10 of these individuals are adults, and they have a substance use issue. We would even say a diagnosed substance use issue. If we were to ask them, hey, what age did you first start using? 4 out of 10, 40% of them started by the age of 15. Okay, 30% started between 15 and 17. All right, so 70% of our adults who have a diagnosed substance use issue started before they were old enough to vote. On the opposite end of that spectrum, only 10%, only 1 out of 10, waited until the legal age of 21 or a little bit older of 22 and still developed a problem. So science shows us that, hey, teen substance use drastically impacts the likelihood of developing a problem. All right, that's our super fast brain in 101. Let's talk about warning signs. So, it's important, well, let's see here. So we have physical warning signs of substance use. Possession of substances or paraphernalia. All right, this is a huge indicator. And if you have a kid that you're working with or you've caught them with paraphernalia and they say, but I'm just experimenting. That is typically not accurate. That's not typically how substance use works. If someone has their own paraphernalia, has their own substances on them, typically that means that they're at least a regular user. Other physical warning signs include changes in their appetite or sleep patterns, major weight loss, major weight gain, they're sleeping a lot, they're not sleeping at all. All of that can be indicators based on what kind of substances they're using. Changes in their physical appearance or grooming habits, that's a big one. If you have a kid who normally groomed really well and all of a sudden those things are starting to fall away, they're not taking care of their appearance as much, maybe they're more frequently wearing dirty clothes or their hair's messy where they were normally a kid who kept that pretty well done, that's an indicator that something's going on. Unusual smells on the breath, body, or clothing, either super sweet smells, right, because we know vapes are a thing and they're super sweet, or overuse of colognes, or just odd smells that you don't recognize. And then last but not least, changes in their speech, slurred speech, or even impaired coordination are physical warning signs that something's going on, and typically a warning sign that they're under the influence. All right, so those are physical. Let's talk behavioral. All right. Now, I will say before we get too far into these are all red flags. These red flags can be red flags for substance use, but they also overlap mental health issues. So if you see these red flags, it's really important to take notice because that means something is going on. It's time to ask some more questions. So behavioral signs, changes in attendance at school. They are not showing up, they're skipping classes, they're showing up late, or their performance at school. They're sleeping through classes, right? They're not paying attention in class. They're not getting their schoolwork done. Unexplained need for money or financial problems. They always seem to be out of lunch money, right? They always seem to be like going through their lunch account money and need you to give them cash to refill it if they do that, those kind of things. Always needing money on their Cash App card, whatever the case might be. Some unexplained need for money, you have to question, where's this money going? Engaging in secretive behaviors. Now, this is hard with teenagers. Teenagers are naturally pulling away from their parents, right, or their guardians. But when they're just, as my 11-year-old today, they're acting super sus, right? We need to figure out, like, what's going on? What are they not telling you? If they're being specific, purposefully evasive, something's happening, something's going on. Sudden changes in friends, hobbies, or hangouts. Oh, this is such a huge red flag. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I've been working with kids who failed their drug tests, and we talk about what they used to do, especially if they failed a couple of drug tests. And they always used to do something. They used to be in sports. They used to be in band or drill team or ROTC, and now they're not anymore. And they'll tell you things like, oh, the sponsor, the coach, that didn't like them, they were mean, whatever the case may be. But as you dig a little deeper, you find that realistically what was happening is that their substance of choice was becoming their passion, and that was interfering with their performance, right? Whatever extracurricular they were doing. And all of a sudden, now, yeah, the coach is being mean because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So major changes in hobbies. Also friends. As we walk through the slide through the different steps towards addiction, friend groups change. The kids who are using hang out with people who share their passions. If substance use is their passion, they're going to hang out with the people who use like they do. And then the last behavioral sign is going to be frequently getting in trouble. Fights, accidents, illegal activities, conflicts with teachers, conflicts with other peers, whatever the case may be. Landing in DAEP or ISS or OCS. Okay, those are all warning signs. All right, so we talked about the physical warning signs. We've talked about the behavioral warning signs. Let's talk about concealment. A little show and tell here. All right, now for those who are watching from home, I have these on the slides, and I have a few of them here up front. It's important to note the stuff I show you may applies today, but our kids have access to the internet. So what is popular and what is hot changes all the time. They learn new things from TikTok every single day. So let's start with stashes. All right, stashes can come in many different forms. We have water bottle stashes. Okay, they just like the picture up there, they come apart. This one looks super realistic, especially when it's full of water, okay? I know that we carry water bottles in schools. They also come in the form of Coke cans and all the various drinks, Dr. Pepper, they come in all the bottles, okay? These are sold, and those are the things I will show you here are often sold on places like Amazon and Temu and places that most of our kids have access to. So it's super easy for them to get to them, and they're sold as diversion safes. They also have water bottles where the bottoms will pop off. I mean, we allow water bottles in our schools, and the top will fill with water, so if our administrator is checking it out, they can see that there's water in it, but the bottom of it holds whatever it is. And books. Now, not all kids are book nerds, but they do make books that are safes, right? Kind of like the one that I have right here. This one's Had a Life. But they don't even have to be this fancy where they're pre-made, right? The one that we see up here on the screen is one that somebody made at home. And it can even be in something like this. This is an inexpensive little journal that I picked up that I get sent from various companies. And it took me less than 5 minutes to cut my own hole in it to make my own stash. Doesn't take a lot. I put my rubber band around it and I slide it in my backpack. And I'm carrying my stash with me for the day. Pop sockets. All right, this was a new one that I learned about this year because I love my pop socket personally, so it kind of hurt my heart to see it. I don't have one of those pop sockets, but they now make pop socket stashes, which granted, if you're talking about various substances, that's not going to hold a whole lot of marijuana. It's not going to hold a cart or anything like that, but it is going to hold pills, and it will hold other things. And in that same line, phone cases. They have a whole lines of phone cases that will be stashes. You can see the one here on the left is specifically designed for people who are stashing their substances. And the one on the right, it looks like they've stashed cigarettes in there, but obviously could be joints or blunts. And they're super stealthy. You wouldn't necessarily notice if you weren't looking for it. And they look like just everyday things. We have our gums, okay? This one, again, purchased on Amazon. the bottom pops off and I can stash whatever I want in there. But if mom, dad, principal is checking, they could open the top and see that I really do have gum in here. Scrunchies. Scrunchies have made a comeback. Okay, we're back in the 1990s again. Now they make scrunchies with little zippers in them that they can hide all their stuff. So as I have my scrunchie on my wrist, I can have whatever it is that I'm concealing on my wrist. They even make them look like screwdrivers. And I have one that looks like a bolt. But they don't even have to get that fancy because they can be everyday hides like my icebreakers container. If I picked up icebreakers because I like them, right? I could easily stash pills in here. We know if you watched the last one, we talked about fentanyl and the increase in counterfeit pills on the market. So I could stash what I wanted in there, or I could flip up the other side and I could hide something bigger. Doesn't have to be fancy. Same concept with Altoids cans. Some teenagers will believe that because of the minty smell that will cause drug dogs not to smell it. Drug dogs, they have a really big part of their brain that handles scent, so they can smell through all things that are considered smell proof. So it doesn't work. Other stashes, they come in 1,000,001 forms. You can do diversion safes, search for them, and they'll pop up everything from brushes to computer mice to batteries. And with things like batteries, it would be super easy for me to take that battery and stick it in a flashlight. If I'm going out with my friends, I can slide it in my flashlight, and I've got my flashlight for whatever my friends and I are going to do, right? So we have what I call my middle school starter kit there. We have our deodorant, and we have Axe body spray. So, and if you pull off the tops of these, which I won't because this one is crumbling, it has real deodorant in it. All right, stashes now come in clothing too. So there are whole clothing lines dedicated to concealment. So this particular clothing line is called Grassroots California. You can see it's got the little bear, but the bear can be switched out for other emblems, and you see underneath that little emblem is a little stash pocket. I can slide my vape in there. I can slide a vial of maybe a cart for my THC vape. I can slide several different things in there. Some of them also have a little pocket right down there where the big pocket is at as well. They also come in the forms of hats. So you can see this one right here. This is a Malin, I know I'm saying that wrong, hat. And so it looks like a traditional baseball cap, something that 90% of our guys walk around wearing. When you get inside there, you can kind of see with this picture on the right, where his fingers is, they have a little stash in there. They can just slide those into. All right. And backpacks. I learned about this one just this past spring. I learned about it from a national presenter, these Cookies backpacks. And then as well as that's the one on the left, the one on the right is Sprayground. They have hidden concealment pockets in them, and they are marketed to have hidden concealment pockets in them. So they are super popular. I learned about them, and the next week I was working on a campus in another district, and I was talking to the young person I was working with, and I said, hey, I just learned about these new backpacks. And he goes, yeah, Cookies backpacks. And I'm like, okay. And I showed it to a director at one of my alternative campuses, and she goes, I have kids walking around with those backpacks. So they are super popular, and kids will know the trends before we will. We learn these trends because kids have been busted with them. But you have to go through and watch YouTube videos on to where to find them, where to find the stash pockets. But these backpacks are available via major retailers. This one here on the right, the Sprayground, the little shark one, comes in lots of different forms. But it's also marketed towards kids. Like they have kid versions and they have their concealment versions from this particular company. So, other concealments, things that we use every day, permanent markers. right? Again, they're not going to hold a whole lot of marijuana, but they're going to hold quite a few pills. And our lovely highlighter. So this particular highlighter is also a pipe. But if I don't want the pipe version, I just remove the stem and I put whatever I want to hide in there. And I just close it back up. All of our kids use highlighters as part of the required back to school list. And then, we have pipes in other forms. We have paracord bracelet pipes. We have just regular pipes, but they come in so many different forms. All right, we got chapsticks, all these innocuous things. All right, so those are stashes. Again, they're called diversion safes, but those are typically how kids are passing these off. And they don't have to be that fancy, but they will find lots of different ways. Let's talk about alcohol concealment, because alcohol still exists. We still have kids sneaking alcohol into school. Some of them sneak it in their water bottles. Yes. These particular shoes that are up here, they are sold at a major retailers in the malls, and they do hold alcohol, right? Most of my kids are not buying those because those are like $70 flip-flops. But they do have access to other things. We have flask bracelets. I did an adult presentation last year, and I pulled this one out, and I swear to you not, 5 of the moms in the room go, that's a flask. So we have flask bracelets. They come in all different shapes and sizes and bedangles and bedazzles. Yes. So, and we have these flasks come in the forms of sunscreen bottles. And they're ones that look like your Copper Twin bottles, right? Or hand sanitizers. Most of us aren't going to necessarily pay attention if my kid's got sunscreen in their bag. Now, if I pick it up and I slosh it around, I'm going to notice the difference. But they come in those kind of forms. And this is my favorite new find tonight. It is an umbrella, right? And so this is an umbrella flask. It doesn't actually open into an umbrella that I saw, but it is an umbrella flask. If our kids are walking between buildings, they might have an umbrella on them. So perfectly legitimate looking thing. My favorite kind of flask that's been around for many, many years is the tampon flask. Yes. And so if I had any officers in the room, one of my favorite things to ask them is if you saw this tampon in a girl's purse, are you going to touch it? And most of the men in the room won't touch it. But this is a booze tube. So just like what's up on the screen, it holds about a shot of alcohol, and a girl just can stash in her purse, and nobody's the wiser, right? And this one came about, this is actually a colleague of mine who they had confiscated one on a campus, which is how we learned about these. Okay, so those are flasks. Flasks, again, come in many forms and fashions. We could be here all night if we wanted to look at all of them. But let's talk about vapes, because even vapes have their own concealment methods. We've seen the vapes. You guys have seen lots of the vapes where they look like these. It's a bag full of vapes that's been confiscated from one of the campuses I work on. So we're used to seeing these. But vapes these days also come in lots of different forms. The one on the left, the highlight vape, got a lot of press this year because it looks like a highlighter, but it is a vape. The one on the right, I don't have my version of it with me, looks like an inhaler, but it is also a vape. And so kids are using them. They come in the form of watches. They also come in the form of pens, where a kid could be sitting and writing in class with it. And then they could just take a little hit off of it. They could sit there and zero out in the back of class, and their teacher's none the wiser. Vapes also have their own clothing lines now. So vape wear has become a hot commodity. And so they make vape hoodies. Now, I know in Red Oak, we don't allow hoodies anymore, but they make hoodless versions of these too. And what they are, they're just little jackets, and they have the little strings. And on one end, you attach your vape of choice. You just stick it in there. Stick it in your little pocket. Drop it in there. And then you sit there. How many of our kids sit there and chew on their little hoodie strings during the day? And they sit there and they vape while they're in class, or vape while they're walking around, or whatever the case may be. We also have vape backpacks. Same concept. This one looks like a hiking backpack because it has the water bladder in it. I have a version of that up here, but the same concept. They have a spot on the back, you can see on that back left shoulder, where there's the mouthpiece. They have a little pocket. There's an adapter here. Again, they stick in whatever vape they want, and they zip it back up, and they suck on it throughout the day. If they don't need it, they can just tuck it away right up here so it's out of the way. And with the exception of the fact that it says vaporware, you're not going to be any of the wiser. And they sell them without all the monogramming. So, and they're just walking around with those. Besides the accessories, our vapes now look a lot alike. So once upon a time, when we would talk about the difference between nicotine vapes and THC vapes, our nicotine vapes often look like this. They look like pens. They're little skinny devices. They typically had a glass cartridge that was on the top, and it was filled with a fluid, and you could typically tell by looking at it and by smelling it that it wasn't a nicotine vape. You could look at it, you could move it around, you go, oh, it's really thick, doesn't look like a nicotine vape, doesn't smell like a nicotine vape. Well, times have changed. Granted, our teenagers shouldn't be using nicotine vapes because the legal age is still 21, but now our THC vapes and our nicotine vapes look an awful lot alike. So we look right here, these ones on the left are all THC vapes, and these ones on the right are all nicotine vapes, and they look very similar. It's hard to tell. Even for me, when I get showed one, I now have to go and just Google it to know if something is a nicotine vape or if it's a THC vape. It used to be that they would say THC on them, or if it was a Delta 8 or a Delta 10, they would have Triangle 8 or Triangle 10. But nowadays they don't. This one here that's on the right, that says Sativa underneath it, it is a THC vape, but nowhere on the vape does it actually say THC unless you're reading the box. I actually had a volunteer for a group that I work with. I was presenting to their group, and I present to their group every couple, like twice a year. And he was like, I found this at Costco today. I took a picture of it and I was going to bring it to you. He goes, I was going to give it to you for your vape collection. He was going to bring me a THC vape. Well, it was on the ground in the parking lot at Costco. It was on the ground in the parking lot at Costco, and I looked at the picture he sent me, and I had just seen this vape on a website, that on the Facebook page that I follow, and I said, was this it? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm going to need you to go home and throw that away. Even though it's empty, it was a THC vape. He was a very sweet older gentleman, but yes. It's like, that is a THC vape. And so nowadays, we can't tell the difference between the two. Even with smell, there's a slightly distinctive smell to the THC vapes. But if you are looking at them, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. Okay, so concealment comes in lots of different forms. It changes every day. If you ever have a question about if something is a concealment item, if it's an indicator of substance use, I would Google it. Like, always Google and look, because they change so quickly. So we've talked about concealment. Now, what can you do? You think your kid's got a problem. First thing is to speak up, all right? Talk to the person you love about your concerns, about what you're worried about. The earlier you intervene, the better the outcomes, all right? Don't wait for them to hit quote unquote rock bottom to say something or do something. All right. The other thing is to take care of yourself. Living with a loved one who has a substance use problem is hard. You cannot get so caught up in their substance use problem that you neglect your own mental health and your own needs. That's huge. Make sure you have people you can talk to, support groups. Even if they're not talking to somebody, you can talk to people and get support. You also want to stay safe. Don't put yourself in dangerous situations. If they get violent when they're under the influence, you need to have a safety plan in place, a way to an exit strategy. We also try to avoid self-blame, okay? It can be really easy, especially for parents, to carry the burden of if our kids are struggling with substance use. But the reality is you can support them and you can encourage treatment, but you cannot force them to change. You can take that horse to water, but you cannot make them drink. A person who is dealing with a substance use issue can only make that change when they are ready. They need to be able to accept responsibility for what's going on, for their actions, which is a huge step along the recovery pathway. And everybody's recovery pathway looks different. What you don't want to do is punish. Punish is important. Setting boundaries and having limits is important, but you need to do it at the right time frame. Grounding them when they're still high, not going to be super effective. All right. You can't threaten addiction, you can't bribe addiction away, and you can't preach addiction away. All right. Try not to be a martyr. All right. Emotional appeals, they're helpful to a point, but a lot of times they also increase feelings of guilt, which then starts the cycle of use again. Do not cover up for the person who's having substance use issues. For a person to come to terms that their behavior is a problem, they have to have consequences for their actions. All right. And with that, don't take over for their responsibilities. Again, don't cover up for them. Don't argue with them when they're high. Gets you nowhere. They may not remember it later. Don't take drugs with them. That seems like a very common sense thing, but that's not as uncommon as we might think. And try not to feel guilty for their behaviors. Again, easier said than done when we're their parents, but it's important to try to remember that. All right. And then ways to help your teenager. Rules. Rules are hard with teenagers. They don't like rules. But you have to lay down specific rules and specific consequences, and you have to stick to them. That can be the hardest part. If you say you're going to take their phone for 5 days, you have to take their phone for 5 days. It's a thing. It's a burden on us as well, but you have to do it. Monitor their activity. Know who they're with, who the parents are of the people they're with, where are they going, what are they doing, all of those things. Encourage interest in other social activities. A busy kid has less time to get in trouble. All right. Talk to your child about underlying issues. A lot of times substance use is a symptom. A lot of times teenagers will use substances as a way to cope with mental health issues that they're struggling with. And get help. All right. If you can't talk to them, find somebody who can. That's really important. And that's a big deal because no one pushes our teenagers' buttons more than us. And no one pushes our own buttons more than our teenagers. So if you can't talk to them, get somebody who can, whether that's an aunt, a member of the clergy, whether that is a therapist, psychiatrist, a school counselor, a scoutmaster, whatever, a coach, okay? Someone to talk to them. It's really important that you get help. So. Teens report that their parents have the greatest influence over their behaviors and decisions more than siblings, friends, or the media. We are the number one protective factor in our kids' lives. It doesn't always feel that way, but we really are. And so it's important to know that even though it's hard and we're going through all this hard, to keep going. Okay, that is the end of that. Questions? Amazon.
there's like one letter that's different or something, that one doesn't look like it's different at all.
Nope. And our Coca-Cola can up there, it's not different either.
Okay. So there's something
Yeah. A lot of those stash safes that look for that are name brand looking, they are being sold on Amazon just looking exactly like that. Or they're being sold on Etsy or eBay. So, yep. So just like that. And if this wasn't so old, I could take off this top and I could drink the water out of it. So, any other questions? Well, if you guys have anything comes up, always feel free to reach out to me. My email is up there on the screen, as well as our website. I'm always happy to answer questions, provide resources. If I don't know who it is, I can connect you with somebody who might know. So otherwise, thanks guys. Appreciate you.